Hey everybody, it's Monday, and that means it's time to talk about marriage and to talk about minds and to talk about meals. Today's lesson is brought to you by the letter M. I'm Jason, this is Renee. We are not marriage counselors, we are not marriage experts. We've just been married a long, long time, 32 years this Thursday. We love marriage. We love God's plan for marriage. We love your marriage and we want to help. So that's why we do these videos. We are going through this book, Your Time-Starved Marriage by the Parrots, Doctors Les and Leslie. And for the next 3 weeks, we are going to be digging into the concept of time mines, where if you do a little bit of work, you are guaranteed to strike gold.
Yeah.
So before we jump into this first time mine where you can create time for your marriage, let's have a history lesson. Everybody loves history. The whole world changed. The entire cultural landscape, family, marriage, just about every relationship completely changed in 1950. Up until 1950, whether you were born in ancient Rome or Greece or in America in the 30s or 40s, you had to sit down and eat a meal that somebody you know prepared for you. Maybe you could go out to a restaurant, but you were eating a meal prepared for you. Slowly, you had to sit there, have company, have a conversation. But in 1950, everything changed because of one man named Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc was the founder of
McDonald's.
McDonald's changed the world in 1950. From that point on, food manufacturers, entrepreneurs, smart people decided if we make food instant, we can make a killing. And one of the things that suffered is relationships, because now you no longer have to sit around a table to eat a meal. You can just eat a meal on the run, on your way to your next activity. So we're not at all bashing McDonald's.
No.
And McDonald's fry is pretty darn good. However, there are some things that we need to learn. Read your stats about fast food.
Okay, so while we're talking about meals, we are looking at back in the 1950s, the idea started of having a drive-through. And they started that in California with McDonald's. And just in about a 20-year time span in the 1970s, Americans were spending $6 billion a year on fast food.
That's a lot of money in the 70s, $6 billion.
Yeah. So by today,
2022,
Americans spend $110 billion on fast food.
$110 billion a year on fast food. This is an amazing stat. Today, Americans spend more money on fast food than on movies, books, magazines, newspapers, video rentals, and music combined.
That's crazy. And we also read in this book that McDonald's is the nation's largest purchaser of beef, pork, and potatoes.
The point is that fast food is here to stay.
Yeah.
And it's so dang convenient. It's so easy to schedule. You know, we're just talking about cramming our schedules full of stuff. It's so easy to cram our schedules full of stuff, forget dinner. It's not even on our schedule anymore. And just grab something on the way to your next activity.
Yeah.
Eat it by yourself, or maybe scarf it down in the car together. But sharing a meal together is a long lost art.
Yeah, and I think even in our lifetime, we can see how that's changed, because along with those stats, this makes sense that over the past 25 years, dinners at home have dropped 33%.
Yeah, in the American household, dinners at home have dropped by a third in 25 years.
And that's within our lifetime.
For sure.
I can see that. I
Yeah.
used to eat at home all the time.
All the time. I'm shocked at, when I sit down with couples, how many couples never share a meal together.
Yeah.
It's just not a thing anymore.
Yeah. And that's an American thing. A Western.
It's a Western civilization thing. Certainly it started here, and people in Europe have adopted that to some extent. But mostly in America, we don't view mealtime as family time. We don't view mealtime as an opportunity for a relationship building experience. We view mealtime as a necessity get it on the run, eat it on the rush, move to your next activity.
Yeah, and we don't need to bash all this,
No.
but I think we need to understand this probably is directly linked to our overactivity.
100%.
Just being so busy, and this is so convenient to run through a drive-through and get food for your family, eat it on the run to your next activity. And sometimes we have to do that. I mean, we do that sometimes.
For sure.
But if that's something that your family is doing more times in the week than you are sitting down to dinner, I think this is just making a case for, this is a time mine. This is a connection point. A meal is a connection point for your marriage and actually for your family.
Yeah, I think there's two facets of this. One is the importance of mealtime with family, which we've talked about a little bit before, and we're not really going to talk about because these videos are specifically for marriage. But a sit-down meal with your family is one of the best gifts you can give your family.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things you can do for your marriage too.
Yeah. So this is a really cool concept that dining together relaxes your spirit and it makes you more loving.
Yeah. He says that a slow meal occurs when you allow your souls to catch up and be reunited after a fast-paced day. That's a great picture of what a mealtime for a marriage should be. It should just be take a deep breath, catch up, remind each other why you love each other.
Yeah. And linger over your meal.
Yep.
And this is not talking about 3 times a day.
Nope.
We have to eat and we have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but this is mostly talking about that dinner meal, I think. And he brings up something important that I think we need to probably say for young families, young couples with young children at home. That's a special season in your life that doesn't last very long, but it's a little different at that time. And he said for them, he and his wife, when their kids were really young, 2 and 3 and 4, it was really hard to have a meal that you could linger over and have some connection time. And so they figured out for them, for their life, they would feed the kids, get them in bed, because they usually go to bed kind of early, and then they actually sat down and had dinner together.
Really good idea.
Yeah.
Listen to these thoughts. So just what this can bring to your marriage, a sit-down meal. Sharing food with another human being is an intimate act and should not be indulged in lightly. There is something in the nature of eating together that forms a bond between people. When I read that, I thought about our home group. That's so true. We have been sharing meals together for years. And it's just, there's something about the way God designed us. When you sit down and share a meal with somebody, it bonds you together.
It does. That's true when we go to Ukraine.
Oh, of course.
That's such a big thing for them to serve us food and make this food, some of it from their own gardens and the duck or the goose or something that they have at their house as a pet that they actually raise to eat. And they fix that for our group.
And the cool thing when you go to Ukraine and you sit down for a meal with somebody, you're going to be there a while.
Yeah.
You're going to eat several courses, and it is not, the purpose of the meal is not to cram food into your face. The purpose of your meal is to share an experience together, and it lasts for a long, long time.
And even though we can't understand each other talking, it really does bond us together. It's really interesting.
And then one person said in a book called In Praise of Slowness, it is no accident that the word companion is derived from the Latin words which mean with bread. So if marriage is a companionship, that comes from the idea that sharing a meal is what bonds you together. And then one more quote. After a good dinner, one can forgive anybody, even one's own relations. I love that. That sharing a meal together moves you to forgiveness.
Yeah.
So let's talk about just some practical things we can do to find that time around mealtime. Obviously, you can't do it 7 days a week.
Right.
Maybe you can because of your schedule, but most of us can't do it 7 days a week, sharing a meal together at least once a day. But you can dig in deep and you can schedule and you can find time to share a nice slow meal together.
Yeah, so we're going to give 4 practical ways to make mealtime really meaningful. Remember, we're not adding anything to anybody's list.
Right. You have to eat dinner.
to eat.
Yeah.
And so you choose. You make a choice every day. Am I going to eat out on the run, or are we going to have a home-cooked meal? or even if it's a meal that we're picking up and we're going to sit down at the table and we're going to actually eat together and linger a little bit. So the first practical way you can do this is to savor your time as much as your meal. And I think just the whole key of this part is slow down. Enjoy the food and enjoy the company. That's really important for me as a teacher because we have to eat lunch so fast in our school year that I make myself slow down in the summer so I'm not just, eating so fast that I almost don't taste my food.
Right.
So I make myself do that. But I think if you could start to do that at dinner time, just realizing it's time to slow down and we're going to savor the time and the food.
I think one of the ways you can do that, you can learn to savor that time, is to make sure you've created the time for that meal. Don't take for granted that you're going to have 30 minutes for a meal.
Yeah.
Put it on your calendar if you have to. Block off that time so that you're not rushed, so that you're not looking at the next activity, but so that you can just be present, be in the moment, enjoy the meal, and savor the time together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, this seems really simple, but I think this is important. You need to ask the right questions. So I've known people that I think they just had this old-fashioned way about eating that nobody was supposed to talk whenever you eat.
Right.
But
that's a thing in some families.
Yeah. I think it's really important, though, especially just because of the way our culture has changed, that we use mealtime as some talk time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's between you and your spouse, if it's just you two, and even if it's your family, just asking the simple question of, how are you doing? And it says, this is a huge way to start talking. And it was really interesting when we read this part that they've had some people that come to counseling, and it's mostly women, say, well, when we eat, he doesn't talk at all. He doesn't
say
talk
anything
to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up a point that maybe women have never really thought about. And I guess this could go the other way. The man might be a talker and the woman is quiet, but normally it's the woman that talks, and the man can't get a word in. And it's because the woman is just talking about herself the whole time and doesn't even ask questions of her man and give them a chance to even say anything. So they kind of clam up, which I thought that was interesting. But they also gave the name of a book that they wrote called Love Talk Starters. That some people, it's not a book you sit down and read, it's just something that you look for a question in there that you could start a conversation, and they keep it on their dinner table.
Great idea. If you're struggling with conversation at dinner time, buy this book, Love Talk Starters by Les and Leslie Parrott. Stick it on your dinner table, and when you sit down for a meal, open it up, ask one of the questions. Super simple, super easy.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and I think it's worth noting again. When we go out to eat sometimes and we see another family and everybody's on their phone and their eyes are down and there is zero conversation.
Turn your dang phone off. Turn it upside down.
Yeah.
Leave it in the car.
Yeah. So, and sometimes there are times when we both need to do some stuff on our phone and get some work done, and that needs to be an exception.
Right.
But for the most part, during mealtime, if you want to have conversation and a meaningful time together and time to linger,
put the phone down.
You can't have your phone. And even little kids with screens and tablets and
100%.
stuff. So, all right. So the next one
I love this one. I love this one so much.
To avoid unpleasantness when you're talking. I think this is a manner, like an actual manner, that you don't digest your food well if you talk about negative things.
That's true. When we have a gathering at the house of people for a meal, which we do on occasion, around holidays and things like that, when there's a big group of people that don't normally get together and we're sharing a meal together, I usually start the meal by saying, we're glad y'all are here. We are not going to talk about politics. We are not going to talk about COVID. We are not going to talk about, and I will list several things. Everybody looks at me like I've lost my mind, but I just set the ground rules right there. These things are not entering our conversation at mealtime. Talk about it some other time, but we're going to sit down at this dinner table together as a family, and we are going to talk about pleasant things, not unpleasant things, which I think has saved many a meal around our table.
Yeah. I think so. So, maybe it's good if this happens a lot in your family, or if you're in a season of your life where there is negativity and negative stuff, maybe you're going through a really hard time. You may have to just set some rules that when we come to the table,
Yeah.
we're not going to do it.
Augustine, who was an early church father, he had this rule. He strictly enforced a rule that the character of an absent person should never be negatively discussed. So if you're sitting around a table and somebody who's not there sitting around the table with you, you don't talk bad about them.
Yeah,
What a great thought.
I know. Or gossip.
Or
It
gossip.
should not be gossip.
Yeah, what a waste. What a waste of your time.
Don't talk about money.
Don't talk about money or paying the bills. It's just a negative thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to live.
And we're not saying avoid those things. We're not saying,
Right.
don't talk about money and don't talk about negative things. There's a time and a place for that. But when you're trying to mine time for your marriage, just eliminate the unpleasant negative things that can creep up and just turn something sour.
Yeah,
I love it.
I do too. And the last practical thing you can do, and this one kind of caught me by surprise, but it says to say grace. And it described this Norman Rockwell painting, which I love Norman Rockwell's work. And there's a painting that he did many years ago that is of a grandmother and a grandson sitting in the corner of a little table when they went out to eat. And there's all this stuff going on around them and people looking at them like maybe they're kind of crazy, and they've got their heads bowed and they're saying a quick little prayer of thanks together before they're going to eat, even though all this stuff is going on around them. Just something that they did together to begin their meal with a thankful heart. And so it did mention that this needs to not be a meaningless thing.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, and I think that
It's not a box checking thing. Oh,
Yeah.
we're going to eat, so we have to pray for our meal. Then it becomes just meaningless words. That's not what we're saying.
Yeah. So, you have to figure out what works for you.
Right.
But it does start your meal off in a special way and starts you with a thankful heart. So those are 4 practical things to do to make mealtime a special connection.
Yep. And ultimately, those meal times are only going to be as good or as valuable as you make them. If you decide to schedule a mealtime and then just sit there and ignore each other,
Yeah.
you're just going through the motions and nothing is happening. You have to put your heart into it. You have to give it effort. Mining something, which is what we're talking about, takes work. It takes effort. How many times have we said that on these stupid videos?
A lot.
Is that this takes work. You're not going to accidentally have a meaningful 30-minute meal with your spouse. You're going to have to plan it. You're going to have to schedule it. You're going to have to maybe prepare a meal or buy a meal. You're going to actually have to sit down, and then you're going to have to put effort into the conversation. But in the end, it's so worth it.
It's worth it.
Yeah. So maybe the best thing for you to do is just analyze your schedule. Look at your schedule for this week, and our challenge to you is sit down as a couple, put those kids to bed early, hire a babysitter, get out of the house, do whatever you have to do, but sometime this week, as a couple, sit down and share a nice, slow meal together.
And linger.
We're going to do that this week in just a couple days. We're going to go up to the lodge in Cloudcroft to celebrate our 32nd anniversary, and one of my favorite things is that we sit in that crazy restaurant that overlooks the mountains,
Yeah.
and we're going to sit by that window, and we're going to have a long, long meal, and we're going to drink coffee at the end, and it's just going to take forever.
Yeah.
But it's going to be just a nice place to share a nice meal together.
Yeah. Are you lingering?
I am. Thanks for watching. Bye.